thank you for talking about like the community resources that are available. I'm a huge advocate of therapy. I'm a huge advocate of seeking out mental health resources for any stage in life, even when you're feeling great. I think it's still good to have a community of support around you, or to have resources of support, because, even when things are great, it's just good to have support there to help you, to be a part of that journey, to be witness to the things that are going great, to remind you of the great things and where you've come, and all of that. And so and then also that, there's not one form of therapy that like one size fits all, and it might not just be one type of thing. There might be several things that you apply. And I'm a very transparent person, and for me, I'll be honest, I've done therapy groups, I have gone to therapy, and what's great are resources like Overeaters Anonymous, CODA, Alcoholics Anonymous, groups that holds the space of vulnerability, where you can be real and raw and share where you're at in your process. And that was amazing is the community of people that are really there to hold you and who understand the experience. There's also something to a really good friend of mine. She leads victim advocacy on the social work side for the Rocky Mountain Victim Law Center. And she is a person who has really opened my eyes to what it is to support a victim, to be a victim advocate. And I remember when I went through a really challenging relationship, and I was explaining, and there's a way where you feel like, gosh, is anybody gonna believe me? And it's hard. And she just right off the bat was like, I don't need proof. I don't need you to show me anything. I don't need you. I believe you. I believe you. And just hearing those words of I believe you, I'm here to support you, are everything. And so that is another way of you're wanting to show support to people in your lives, is like believe them and support them. That is so important. Which I think leads into the maybe number 3 of your pillars of take trauma seriously. Before we get to these pillars, I now had some really good questions here. Have you kept in contact with the other theater survivors?
I actually did not. I feel like maybe I wouldn't have had such a struggle if I had, but the only person that I really knew was Carlos in that theater. I think one of his friends was there that he worked with. But besides that, I recently learned that it's just so crazy how small the world can be. One of my coworkers knew one of the gals that her daughter was killed that night, and she actually was shot and is paralyzed from the waist down. And I just learned of that recently within the last few months. And a part of me now wants to reach out to survivors and just let them know, like, that I'm so sorry, for what happened, but to maybe try to connect with them. But I haven't really kept in touch with them now. It's something that I have wanted to do, so maybe perhaps I'll get into that hopefully soon.
Has this... No, it's not crazy at all, actually. I feel like that's probably more normal, because it's when you go through a traumatic experience like this, you really just want, that's the thing with trauma, is like we just want to close the door, act like it didn't happen, shove it under the mat, like put it away, it didn't exist, right? And so of course that makes perfect sense. And I totally would understand that. And if that feels like it's something that's calling you,
Yeah.
maybe, like definitely do that if you really feel called to. And also know that you also don't have to do that too,
Right.
Then what about, has this strengthened or changed your views on gun control at all? Which is an interesting
Yeah.
subject. Yeah.
To know a little bit about my background, it might help to understand my view on that a little better.
Good.
I come from a military background. My father was in the Air Force. My grandfather
Mine
was
too.
in the Navy, and I have a cousin
Mhm.
who's in the Army. Um, I believe in our Second Amendment right to bear arms, but
Mhm.
I had prior to this um, tragic event happening, um, I had felt very strongly about gun control laws, that they
Mhm.
weren't strict enough, and this did strengthen my view on that.
Mhm.
Because how firearms had been handled, and I feel like they're still being handled really loosely,
Yes, they are.
is that anyone can buy one. I mean,
Mhm. Yeah.
there's no sense of accountability. And if you knew the whole story around the actual gunman at the theater shooting, which I just don't even speak their name, but
Mhm.
um, they were purchasing these weapons for months on end,
Right.
uh, and ammunition for months on end, and had
Right.
some really sophisticated, like ballistics type of equipment.
Right.
It's just it, it's something that I feel like does still need a lot of reform. There needs to be a lot more accountability with how these firearms and weapons are sold, why they're even accessible at the a sophistication that they're in. He had an assault rifle,
Mhm.
into bringing it into a movie theater. Um, it was like a smoke bomb, I think, is what he initially threw into the crowd that I described. He was in full ballistic gear. Uh,
Right.
why
That.
are you,
Right.
and how to not put together when we know about online sales of these things? So I still, though I did take a conceal and carry class. I don't carry my own license yet, but I
Mhm.
do plan to eventually.
Mhm.
And I know this is a very, controversial type of topic, but I'm always willing to share how I feel about it. And I do feel like there could be a lot more care and accountability taken when it comes to the accessibility of the caliber of these weapons that this individual in particular had access to. Why?
Right.
I mean, it just doesn't make sense. So yeah, that's
Right.
how I feel about it.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great stance to take, and I really agree with that. Okay, so moving into these three pillars, being consistent and reliable, to listen without judgment, and three, take trauma seriously. Now, in your talk, when I was hearing it, I was thinking, gosh, from the support side, how can I be consistent and reliable for, a loved one who's going through trauma? How can I listen without judgment? How can I take trauma seriously? But you're also wanting to point to the fact that as the survivor, these are also pillars that we need to apply to ourselves. And I think that we have a short period of time to get this talk and
I
squeeze
know.
this from the window. And I would love for you to expand the conversation around these three pillars and how they apply to the survivor, you know, using these pillars for themselves.
So thank you, Sarah. Yes, definitely. I feel like that, like you said, I think we were given a certain window of like 10 to 13 minutes, something like that, for the optimal time for our talk. And
Mhm.
I think I surpassed that. My talk was like 14 minutes and some change. But it so I didn't get to expand on this part of it. But yes, I meant for the pillars to also be for the survivor, because we ultimately have to decide that we want to take control of what what we feel like we're spiraling out of control for. And being consistent and reliable for me looks like hey, you have to be consistent and reliable in your goals. You also have to be consistent and reliable in what you're doing to combat your self-destructive mode, your self-destructive ways. And so, my support system was doing that for me. And every time I took a tumble or a fall, they were always there for me. But are you going to keep tumbling and falling?
Right.
After a while, your support system gets a little tired too, because
Right.
they love you. They don't want to see you doing that to yourself over and over and over again. So I had to take accountability for my own self-destructive nature. When I became overwhelmed or stressed, I would just turn to these things that were not good for me, and then always just expecting my support system to be there for me. That wasn't fair. So that's what the first pillar looks like for me, reflecting it back on myself. The second pillar was listening without judgment. And I explained to people, when I explain to people that, hey, these pillars are not just for your support system, they're also for you, some people get confused and they're like, what do you mean? Like, how am I supposed to listen to myself without judgment?
Right.
And a part of that is it's hard to think about, because it should come naturally, I feel like, is why we have that initial reaction, but it doesn't. And I had come into realizing that when I didn't tell my mom about my DUI until after I had finished all of the requirements. It was because I was ashamed. I felt like she was going to be so disappointed in me. I mean, I just didn't want her to be upset with me at all, or to upset her. And the fact of the matter was, she's my listening without judgment pillar that I use as an example.
Yeah.
She was still going to be there for me regardless, but I had a hard time taking that judgment part out for me, for things that I did that I felt were wrong. And so we have to do that for ourselves too. And kind of how I mentioned to people, good people make bad decisions. I had to realize that too. It doesn't mean I'm a bad person because I made a mistake. But you have to listen to yourself and be honest with yourself and say, why did I do that? Let's get down to the real issue, like what really happened there. Once you are in sound mind and you're back sober, which is the case for me, and I could think with a clear head, stop judging yourself. Be honest with yourself. So that second pillar was definitely important for me to do, as well as have my support system do, to reinforce that. The last one is to take trauma seriously. And I'll tell you what, that is the part that both Carlos and I kind of struggled with. But everything kind of came together when I accepted the TED Talk invitation, initially to talk about trauma and help others that have survived trauma live through it. But then it culminated into talking about the theater shootings, which I never had really talked about in detail before the TED Talk. So that part of taking the trauma seriously, I was able to stop joking about it, because I would just joke about it, be like, oh, well, drinking is my thing. It's how I deal with my trauma. Or working myself to death is how I deal with my trauma. Like, girl, take your trauma seriously. If you want other people to take your trauma seriously, then you also have to do that too. And realize that what you've been through is not okay. It's number one, it wasn't okay. Number two, it's not normal. And number three, it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to say, like, yeah, it's okay to be a hot mess, which,
that was it. Hashtag hot mess. That should be the
hot mess. So, yeah. And because it's not something, trauma is something that can ruin your life, but it also can be something that helps you decide to live on and persevere. I had to figure out, though, like, another thing for me, Sarah, that really helped me take my trauma seriously was, like, why am I doing all of what I'm doing? Why am I working 2 or 3 jobs? Why am I going to get my master's and my bachelor's? Why was that necessary? you know, and I really found my purpose rather than just spinning in a hamster wheel over and over again. Because initially it was to keep myself busy, but I kept avoiding that. Oh no, it's because I want to do this for me and whatever. And in reality, I was avoiding a lot of things. I was avoiding a lot of what I had been through in my past, even before the theater shooting. And ultimately, I had to come up with viable reasons why I was doing those things. And in that process, learn, hey, you're first generation master's degree recipient. You're first generation American, Korean American. You're doing this for your family. Like, let's put a purpose behind it and not just be spinning in a wheel. And that really helped me to refocus and center myself as well, because that's what happens, I think, with survivor's guilt. You just throw yourself into this hamster wheel, and for some of us, that's not everyone's story, and you just keep on going in this cycle, and then you don't really understand why you didn't really have a purpose, So coming to that realization really helped me find a direction and more of where I wanted to be, for a specific purpose rather than just going. I was just running before, running away, but now I'm running towards something.
Yeah, that's beautiful.